It was 1848, gold turned up in California's American River, and within weeks an entire continent seemed to lose its mind. Farmers, tradesmen, even attorneys dropped everything to go dig in riverbeds. Nearly all of them came away with nothing but disease, hunger, and debt. Yet one man walked out of that frenzy as the gold rush's first millionaire, and he never touched a pickaxe. His name was Samuel Brannan. Instead of grabbing a shovel, he cornered the market on shovels before most people even knew there was gold to find. His insight was simple: in moments of chaos, the real money isn't made by the people scrambling in the dirt, it's made by whoever controls the supplies they need to get there. Fast forward to 2026, as fighting rages across the Middle East between the United States, Israel, and Iran, a strikingly similar pattern is unfolding. America is burning through its weapons stockpiles, Iran is fighting for survival, and one nation is quietly cashing in from the sidelines: China. Without deploying a single soldier, Beijing has converted the era's most dangerous conflict into perhaps its most lucrative business opportunity. How is a country that isn't even part of the war coming out ahead? Is this strategic genius, or is China setting itself up to be isolated once the fighting stops? Brannan's trick wasn't invention, it was positioning. He made certain his was the only store on the only route the miners had to take. Economists have a term for this on a national scale: monopsony, the mirror image of a monopoly. Where a monopoly means a single seller dominates, a monopsony means there's effectively only one beer left standing. Crushing sanctions and relentless military pressure have stripped Iran of options. Banks worldwide are afraid to process Iranian transactions. Shipping firms avoid Iranian ports entirely. The result? Roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports now flow to one place: the small, independent teapot refineries of China's Shandong province. Unlike China's giant state-run refiners, these smaller operations have no exposure to US banks, so American sanctions don't scare them. For them, Iranian crude isn't just affordable, it's a once-in-a-generation deal. By February 2026, Iran was selling China light crude at more than $12 below the global Brent benchmark. At an import volume nearing 2 million barrels daily, that gap isn't a minor discount, it's a colossal transfer of wealth. The dynamic runs even deeper, because China is simultaneously squeezing Russia. Both Moscow and Tehran are starved for cash to bankroll their respective wars, and that desperation has triggered a bidding war in reverse. Early 2026 saw Russian Urals crude discounted by roughly $13. Each time Russia cuts its price to win Chinese buyers, Iran has to undercut it further just to stay competitive. China doesn't have to lift a finger, it simply watches two of its closest partners race each other toward the bottom. The cumulative savings from these discounts have added up to billions of dollars for the Chinese economy, even as Europe and Japan pay record energy prices because of the same instability. This flood of cheap energy is doing more than padding China's books, it's treating a serious ailment: deflation. Falling prices might sound pleasant to a shopper, but for a massive economy they're poison. When people expect prices to keep dropping, they delay spending, which squeezes factory profits, which triggers layoffs, which further dampens spending, a self-reinforcing downward spiral. By late 2025, China was enduring its worst deflationary stretch in 3 decades. Discounted oil from Iran and Russia has acted as a counterweight, driving down the cost of transportation, electricity, and raw materials across the board, and giving Chinese manufacturers breathing room that their international competitors lack. The contrast is stark. In March 2026, German chemical giant BASF hiked prices 30% across Europe just to keep pace with soaring energy costs, while Beijing was busy cushioning fuel prices for its own citizens to keep production lines humming. In effect, the Middle East war is simultaneously weakening China's Western rivals and supplying Beijing with exactly the cheap fuel it needs to fight its domestic economic troubles. The advantages aren't purely economic, there's a military payoff too, and it should worry the Pentagon. Combat is the ultimate testing ground. Throughout 2025, US and Israeli forces used electronic warfare to blind Iranian drones and missiles by jamming the American GPS signals those weapons depended on. Then something changed. Iran began wiring its weapons systems to China's Beidou satellite network instead, and strike accuracy improved sharply. Beta runs on 45 satellites versus GPS's 30, and it's engineered for environments thick with jamming, using frequency hopping that makes it far harder to disrupt. For Beijing, this is an ideal scenario, real combat-tested performance data on its satellite technology against top-tier Western defenses, gathered without putting a single Chinese pilot at risk. Every Iranian missile launch effectively becomes a free field test for China's systems. Meanwhile, the United States is footing an enormous bill in dollars and in dwindling supplies. Keeping a single aircraft carrier stationed in the Gulf runs over $6 million daily, and each interceptor fired to stop a cheap drone costs millions more. The real damage isn't financial, though it's inventory. Analysts warn that the US is burning through long-range missile stocks earmarked for a possible confrontation over Taiwan, munitions that can take nearly 2 years to replace. With every passing day of conflict in the Middle East, the strategic opening for a Chinese move on Taiwan widens a bit more as Washington depletes resources far from its core Pacific priorities. There's an old axiom in geopolitics: America wins the war, but China wins the peace. Iraq is the textbook case. The US poured trillions of dollars and countless lives into toppling a government, only to watch Chinese state firms scoop up the major oil contracts once the dust settled. China lets others absorb the chaos, then arrives with capital instead of weapons. That pattern is already visible. In May 2025, the first direct freight train rolled into Tehran from China, completing a land route that sidesteps maritime shipping entirely, part of the broader Belt and Road push. While other powers tear infrastructure down, China is busy building the next version of it. Yet this strategy of profitable detachment carries a hidden cost, and the story circles back to Samuel Brannan's ending. Despite being California's first millionaire, he died broke. His wife divorced him, his assets were liquidated to cover the settlement, and he spent his final days alone in a boarding house. When he died in 1889, his body sat unclaimed in a morgue for a year because nobody would pay for his funeral. The man who profited from everyone else's hardship discovered, too late, that he had built no real loyalty, no friends, no allies, nobody who felt indebted to him. China risks a similar fate by watching Iran, a key strategic partner, get battered while offering little beyond mild diplomatic language. Beijing is broadcasting a message to the world: its alliances are transactional, not fraternal. For nations across the global south weighing alternatives to US leadership, that's a sobering signal. NATO operates on a mutual defense principle. An attack on one is an attack on all. China's model looks more like every nation for itself. Sign a deal with Beijing and you'll get infrastructure and energy purchases, but if war breaks out, you're on your own. For now, China is clearly winning the 2026 conflict. It has locked in discounted energy, gathered free combat data on its military technology, and watched its main rival burn through both money and munitions. It's the Samuel Brannan of this century, but history offers a warning. The merchant who profits from the sidelines often ends up isolated once the chaos subsides. If Beijing keeps treating its global partnerships as purely transactional, it may end up the wealthiest nation on Earth, with no one willing to stand beside it when it matters. The strategy is shrewd, but it's also brittle. As the Middle East conflict nears its tipping point, the world is watching to see whether China will finally step forward to defend the interests it has spent decades cultivating, or keep watching from a distance until there's nothing left worth buying. In the end, the deciding factor in global power may not be missile counts or gold reserves. It may be whether you have allies willing to fight once the profits stop flowing.